Hello my dear students, welcome to Teacher at Home. Today class we are going to learn the fifth chapter Democratic Rights. Overview. In this chapter we are going to study the rights, democratic rights. That is, in the previous two chapters we have looked at two major elements of a democratic government. In chapter 3 we saw how a democratic government has to be periodically elected by the people in a free and fair manner. In chapter 4, we learned that a democracy must be based on institutions that follow certain rules and procedures. These elements are necessary but not sufficient for a democracy. Elections and institutions need to be combined with a third element, enjoyment of rights, to make a government democratic. Even the most properly elected rulers, walking through the established institutional process, must learn not to cross some limits. Citizens' democratic rights set those limits in a democracy. This is what we take up in this final chapter of the book. We begin by discussing some real life cases to imagine what it means to live without rights. This leads to a discussions on what we mean by rights and why do we need them. As in the previous chapter, the general discussion is followed by a focus on India. We discuss one by one the fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution. Then we turn to how these rights can be used by ordinary citizens. Who will protect and enforce them? Finally, we take a look at how the scope of rights has been expanding. Life without rights. In this book, we have mentioned rights again and again. If you remember, we had discussed rights in each of these four preceding chapters. Can you fill in the blanks by recalling the rights that I mentioned in this chapter? Chapter 1, a comprehensive definition of democracy includes. Chapter 2, our constitutional makers believed that the fundamental rights. Dear Mr. Tony Blair, firstly, how are you? I sent a letter 2 years ago. Why don't you reply? I was waiting for a long time, but you did not reply. Please, can you give me an answer to my question? What is my dad in prison? Why is my dad in prison? Why is he far away in that Guantanamo Bay? I miss my dad so much. I had not seen my dad for 3 years. I know my dad has not done anything because he is a good man. I hear everybody speak about my dad in a nice way. Your children spend Christmas with you, but me and my brothers and sisters have spent it alone without our dad for 3 years. What do you think about that? I hope you will answer me this. Thank you from Anas Jamit E. Bana, 9 years old. That is second one. That is our constitution makers believed that fundamental rights were quite central to the constitution because chapter 3 every adult citizen of India has the right to and to be. Chapter 4 if a law is against the constitution every citizen has the right to approach. Let us now begin with three examples of what it means to live in the absence of rights. Prison in Guantanamo Bay. About 600 people were secretly picked up by the US forces from all over the world and put in a prison in Guantanamo Bay, an area near Cuba controlled by American Navy. Anna's father, Jamil Ibana, was among them. American government said that they were enemies in the US and linked it to the attack of the New York on 11th September 2001. In most cases, the government of their countries were not asked or even informed about their imprisonment. Like other prisoners, El-Bana's family got to know that he was in the prison only through the media. Families of prisoners, media, or even UN representatives were not allowed to meet them. The US Army arrested them, interrogated them, and decided whether to keep them there or not. There was no trial before any magistrate in the US, nor could these prisoners approach courts in their own country. Amnesty International, an international human rights organization, collected information on the condition of the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay and reported that the prisoners were being tortured in ways that violated the US laws. They were being denied the treatment that even prisoners of war must get as per international treaties. Many prisoners have tried protesting against these conditions, by going on a hunger strike. Prisoners were not released even after they were officially declared not guilty. An independent inquiry by the UN supported these findings. The UN Secretary General said the prison in Guantanamo Bay should be closed down. US government refused to accept this plea. Citizen rights in Saudi Arabia. The case of Guantanamo Bay looks like an exception, for it involves the government of one country denying rights to citizens of another country. Let us therefore look at the case of Saudi Arabia and the position of the citizens with regard to their government. Consider these facts. The country is ruled by a hereditary king and the people have no role in electing or changing their rulers. The king selects the legislature as well as the executive. He appoints the judges and can change any of their decisions. Citizens cannot form political parties or any other political organizations. Media cannot report anything that the monarch does not like. There is no freedom of religion. Every citizen is required to be Muslim. Non Muslim residents can follow their religion in private but not in public. Women are subjected to many public restrictions. The testimony of the one man is considered equal to that of two women. This is trust true not just of Saudi Arabia. There are many countries in the world where several of these conditions exist. Ethnic massacre in Kosovo. You might think that this is possible in an absolute monarchy, but not in countries with which choose their rulers. Just consider the story from Kosovo. This was a province of Yugoslavia before it split. In this province, the population was overwhelmingly ethnic Albanian, but in the entire country, Serbs were in majority. A narrow minded Serb nationalist Milosevic pronounced Milosevic had won the election. His government was very hostile to the Kosovo Albanians. He wanted the Serbs to dominate the country. Many Serb leaders thought that the ethnic minorities like Albanians should either leave the country or accept the dominance of the Serbs. This is what happened to an Albanian family in a town in Kosovo in April 1999. 79-year-old Badisha Hoxha was sitting in her kitchen with her 77-year-old husband, Izzet, staying warm by the stove. They had heard explosions but did not realize that Serbian troops had already entered the town. The next thing she knew, 5 or 6 soldiers had burst through the front door and were demanding, "Where are your children?" They shot Izzet 3 times in the chest, recalled Badisha. With her husband dying before her, the soldiers pulled the wedding ring off her ring and told her to get out. I was not even outside the gate when they burned the house. She was standing on the street in the rain, with no house, no husband, no possessions but the clothes she was wearing. This news report was typical of what happened to thousands of Albanians in that period. Do remember that this massacre was being carried out by the army of their own country, working under the direction of a leader who came to power through democratic elections. This was one of the worst instances of killings based on ethnic prejudices in recent times. Finally, several other countries intervened to stop the massacre. Milosevic lost power and was tried by the International Court of Justice for crimes against humanity. Rights in a democracy. Think of all the examples that we have discussed so far. Think of the victims in each examples, the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, women in Saudi Arabia, Albanians in Kosovo. If you were in the position, what would you have wished? If you could, what would you do to ensure that such things do not happen to anyone? You would perhaps desire a system when security, dignity, and fair play are assured to everyone. You might want, for example, that no one should be arrested without proper reason and information. And if someone is arrested, he or she should have a fair chance to defend themselves. You might agree that such assurance cannot apply to everything. One has to be reasonable in what one expects and demands to everyone else, for one has to grant the same for everyone. But you might insist that the assurance does not remain on paper, that there is someone to ensure this assurance, that those who violate this are punished. In other words, you might want a system or at least a minimum is guaranteed to everyone, a powerful or weak, rich or poor, majority or minority. This is the spirit behind thinking about rights. What are rights? Rights are claims of a person over other fellow beings, over the society, and over the government. All of us want to live happily, without fear and without being subjected to degraded treatment. For this, we expect others to behave in such a way that does not harm us or hurt us. Equally, our actions should not also harm or hurt others. So, a right is possible when you make a claim that is equally possible for others. You cannot have a right that harms or hurts others. You cannot have a right to play a game in such a way that it breaks a neighbor's window. The Serbs in Yugoslavia could not have claimed the whole country for themselves. The claims we make should be reasonable. They should be such that can be made available to others in an equal measure. Thus, a right comes with an obligation to respect with others, respect with rights. Just because we claim something, it does not become our rights. It has to be recognized by the society we live in. Rights acquire meaning only in society. Every society makes certain rules to regulate our conduct. They tell us what is right and what is wrong. What is recognized by the society as rightful becomes the basis of rights. That is why the notion of rights changes from time to time and society to society. 200 years ago, anyone who said that women should have right to vote would have sounded strange. Today, not granting them vote in Saudi Arabia appears strange. When the socially recognized claims are written into law, they acquire real force. Otherwise, they remain merely as natural or moral rights. The prisoners in Guantanamo Bay had a moral claim not to be tortured or humiliated, but they could not go to anyone to enforce this claim. When law recognizes some claims, they become enforceable. We can then demand their application. When fellow citizen or government do not respect their rights, we call it violation or infringement of our rights. In such circumstances, citizens can approach courts to protect their rights. So if we want to call any claim a right, it has to have these three qualities. Rights are reasonable claims of persons recognized by society and sanctioned by law. Why do we need rights in a democracy? Rights are necessary for the very substance of a democracy. In a democracy, every citizen has to have the right to vote and the right to be elected to government. For democratic elections to take place, it is necessary that citizens should have the right to express their opinion, form political parties, and take part in political activities. Rights also perform a very special role in the democracy. Rights protect minorities from the oppressions of the majority. They ensure that the majority cannot do whatever it likes. Rights are guarantees which can be used when things go wrong. This may go wrong when some citizens may wish to take away the rights of others. This usually happens when those in minority want to dominate those in minority, majority want to dominate those in minority. The government should protect the citizen rights in such a situation. But sometimes elected governments may not protect or may even attack the rights of their own citizens. That is why some rights need to be placed higher than the government so that the government cannot violate them. In most democracies, the basic rights of the citizen are written down in the constitution. Right in the Indian constitution. In India, like most other democracies in the world, the rights are mentioned in the constitution. Some rights, which are fundamental to our life, are given a special status. They are called fundamental rights. We have already read in chapter 2 the preamble to our constitution. It talks about securing for all its citizens equally equality, liberty, and justice. Fundamental rights put this promise into effect. They are an important basic features of India's constitution. You already know our constitution provides for six fundamental rights. Can you recall this? What exactly do the rights mean for an ordinary citizen? Let us look at this one by one. Right to equality. It is fundamental rights, right to constitutional remedies, right to equality, right to freedom, cultural and educational rights, right to freedom of religion, right against exploitation. Right to equality. The Constitution says that the government shall not deny to any person in India equality before the law or equal protection of the law. It means that the laws applies in the same manner to all, regardless of a person's status. This is called the rule of law. Rule of law is the foundation of any democracy. It means that no person is above the law. There cannot be any distinction between a political leader, a government official, and an ordinary citizen. Every citizen, from the Prime Minister to a small farmer in a remote village, is subjected to the same laws. No person can legally claim any special treatment or privilege just because he or she happens to be an important person. For example, a few years ago, a former Prime Minister of the country faced a court case on charges of cheating. The court finally declared that he was not guilty, but as long as the case continued, he had to go to the court, give evidence, and file papers just like any other citizen. This basic position is further clarified in the Constitution by spelling out some implications of the right to equality. The government shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. Every citizen shall have access to public places like shops, restaurants, hotels, and cinema halls. Similarly, there shall be no restriction with regard to the use of wells, tanks, bathing gardens, roads, playgrounds, and places of public resorts maintained by government or dedicated to the use of general public. This might appear very obvious, but it was necessary to incorporate these rights in the constitution of our country, where the traditional caste system did not allow people from some communities to access all public places. The same principle applies to public jobs. All citizens have equality of opportunity in matters relating to the employment or appointment to any position in the government. No citizen shall be discriminated against or made eligible for employment on the grounds mentioned above. You have read in Chapter 4 that the Government of India has provided reservations for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes. Various governments have different schemes for giving preferences to women, poor, or physically handicapped in some kind of jobs. Are these reservations against the right to equality? They are not. For equality does not mean giving everyone the same treatment no matter what they need. Equality means giving everyone an equal opportunity to achieve whatever one is capable of. Sometimes it is necessary to give special treatment to someone in order to ensure equal opportunity. This is what job reservations do. Just to clarify this, the Constitution says that the reservation of this kind are not a violation of the right to equality. The principle of non-discrimination extends to social life as well. The Constitution mentions one extreme form of social discrimination, a practice of untouchability, and clearly directs the government to put an end to it. The practice of untouchability has been forbidden in any form. Untouchability here does not only mean refusal to touch people belonging to certain castes, it refers to any belief or social practice which looks down upon people on account of their birth with certain caste labels. Such practices denies them interaction with others or access to public places as equal citizens. So the Constitution made untouchability a punishable offense. Many forms of untouchability. 1999, P. Sainath wrote a series of news reports in the Hindu describing the untouchability and caste discrimination that was still being practiced against Dalits or persons belonging to scheduled castes. He traveled to various parts of the country and found them in many places. Tea stalls kept kinds of cups, one for Dalit and one for others. Barbers refused to serve Dalit clients. Dalit students were made to sit separately in the classroom or drink water from separate picture. Dalit grooms were not allowed to ride a horse in the wedding processions. Dalits were not allowed to use a common hand pump, or if they did, the hand pump was washed to purify it. All these fall under the definition of untouchability. Can you think of some examples? Right to freedom. Freedom means the absence of constraints. In practical life, it means absence of interference in our affairs by others, be it other individuals or the government. We want to live in society, but we want to be free. We want to do things in the way we want to do them. Others should not dictate us what we should do. So, under the Indian Constitution, all citizens have the right to freedom of speech and expression, assembly in a peaceful manner, form associations and unions, move freely throughout the country, reside in any part of the country, and practice any profession or to carry or any occupation, trade or business. You should remember that every citizen has the right to all these freedoms. That means you cannot exercise your freedom in such a manner that violates others' rights to freedom. Your freedom should not cause public nuisance or disorder. You are free to do everything which injures no one else. Freedom is not unlimited license to do what one wants. Accordingly, the government can impose certain reasonable restrictions on our freedoms in the larger interest of a society. Freedom of speech and expression is one of the essential features of any democracy. Our freedom, ideas, and personality develop only when we are able to freely communicate with others. You may think it differently from others. Even if 100 people think in one way, you should have the freedom to think it differently and express your views accordingly. You may disagree with a policy of government or activities in an association. You are free to criticize the government or the activities in the association in your conversations with parents, friends, and relatives. You may publicize your views through a pamphlet, magazine, or newspaper. You can do it through paintings, poetry, or songs. However, you cannot use this freedom to instigate violence against others. You cannot use it to incite people to rebel against the government. Neither can you use it to defame others by saying false and mean things that cause damage to a person's reputation. Citizens have the freedom to hold meetings, processions, rallies, and demonstrations on any issues. They may want to discuss a problem, exchange ideas, mobilize public support to a cause, or seek votes for a candidate or party in an election. But such meetings have to be peaceful. They should not lead to public disorder or breach of peace in society. Those who participate in these activities and meetings should not carry weapons with them. Citizens also can form associations. For example, workers in a factory can form a workers' union to promote their interests. Some people in a town may come together to form an association to campaign against corruption or pollution. As citizens, we have the freedom to travel to any part of the country. We are free to reside and settle in any part of the territory of India. Let us say a person who belongs to a state of Assam wants to start a business in Hyderabad. He may not have any connection with that city. He may not have even seen it ever. Yet, as a citizen of India, he has a right to set up base there. This right allows lakhs of people to migrate from villages to towns and from the poorer regions to the countries of prosperous region and big cities. The same freedom extends to choice of occupation. No one can force you to do or not to do certain job. Women cannot be told that some kind of occupations are not for them. People from deprived classes cannot be kept to their traditional occupations. The Constitution says that no person can be deprived of his life or personality liberty except according to procedure established by law. It means that no person can be killed unless the court has ordered a death sentence. It also means that a government or police officer cannot arrest or detain any citizen unless he has proper legal justification. Even when they do, they have to follow some procedures. A person who is arrested and detained in custody will have to be informed of the reasons for such arrest and detention. A person who is arrested and detained shall be produced before the nearest magistrate within a period of 24 hours of arrest. Such a person has the right to consult a lawyer or engage a lawyer to his defense. Let us recall the cases of Guantanamo Bay and Kosovo. The victims in both these cases faced a threat to the most basic of all liberties, the protection of individual life and personal liberty. Right against exploitation. Once the right to liberty and equality is granted, it follows that every citizen has the right not to be exploited. Yet the Constitution markers thought is was necessary to write down certain clear provisions to prevent exploitation of the weaker sections of the society. The Constitution mentions three specific evils and declares this illegal. First, the Constitution prohibits traffic in human beings. Traffic here means selling and buying of human beings, usually women, for immoral purposes. Second, our Constitution also prohibits forced labor or beggar in any form. Beggar is a practice where the worker is forced to render service to the master free or charge or at a nominal remuneration. When this practice takes place on a lifelong basis, it is called the practice of bonded labor. Finally, the Constitution also prohibits child labor. No one can employ a child below the age of 14 or work in any factory or mine or in a hazardous work, such as railways or ports. Using this, a basis, many laws have been made to prohibit children from working in industries such as bead making, firecrackers, and matches printing and dyeing. A petition was filed in the Madras High Court. The petitioner said a large number of children aged between 7 and 12 were taken from villages in Salem district and sold at auctions at Oilur Nagar in Kerala's Thrissur district. The petitioner requested the court to order the government to check these facts. Children from the age of 5 were employed in the iron ore mines in the Hospet, Sandur, and Ikal areas of Karnataka. They were forced to carry out digging, breaking stones, loading, dumping, transporting, and processing of iron ore with no safety equipments, fixed wages, and working hours. They handled a high level of toxic waste and were exposed to mine dust, which was above the permissible level. The school dropout rate in the region was very high. The latest annual survey conducted by the National Sample Survey Organization found that the number of female child laborers was growing both in rural and urban areas. The survey revealed there were 41 female child laborers per thousand work population in rural areas against the previous figure of 34 per thousand. The figure of male child had remained at 31. Right to freedom of religion. Right to freedom includes right to freedom of religion as well. In this case, to the constitution makers were very particular to state it clearly. You have already read in chapter 2 that India is a secular state. Most people in India, like anywhere else in the world, follow different religions. Some may not believe in any religion. Secularism is based on the idea that the state is concerned only when the relations among human beings and not with the relation between human beings and God. A secular state is one that does not establish any one of the religion as official religion. Indian secularism practices an attitude of a principled and equal distance from all religions. The state has to be neutral and impartial in dealing with all religions. Every person has the right to process, practice, and propagate the religion he or she believes in. Every religion, group, or sect is free to manage its religious affairs. A right to propagate one's religion, however, does not mean that a person has the right to compel another person to convert into religion by means of force, fraud, inducement, or allurement. Of course, a person is free to charge religion on his or her own will. Freedom to practice religion does not mean that a person cannot do whatever he wants in the name of religion. For example, one cannot sacrifice animals or human beings as offerings to supernatural forces or gods. Religious practices which treat women as inferior or those that infringe women's freedom are not allowed. For example, one cannot force a widow to shave head or wear white clothes. A secular state is one that does not confer any privilege or favor on any particular religion, nor does it punish or discriminate against people on the basis of religion they follow. Thus, the government cannot compel any person to pay any taxes for the promotion or maintenance of any particular religion or religious institution. There shall be no religious instruction in the government educational institutions. Educational institutions managed by private bodies. No person shall be compelled to take part in any religious instruction or to attend any religious worship. Cultural and educational rights. You might wonder why the constitution makers were so particular in providing written guarantees on the rights of the minorities. Why are there no special guarantees for the majority? Well, for the simple reason that the working of democracy gives power to the majority. It is the language, culture, and religion of majorities that need special protection. Otherwise, they might get neglected or undermined under the impact of the knowledge, language, religion, and culture of the majority. That is why the Constitution specifies the cultural and educational rights of the minorities. Any section of citizens with a distinct language or culture have a right to conserve it. Admission to any educational institution maintained by government or receiving government aid cannot be denied to any citizen on the ground of religion or language. All minorities have the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. Here, minority doesn't mean only religious minority at the national level. Some places, people speaking a particular language are in majority. People speaking a different language are in minority. For example, Telugu speaking people form a majority in Andhra Pradesh, but they are in minority in the neighboring state of Karnataka. Sikhs constitutes a majority in Punjab, but they are a minority in Rajasthan, Haryana, and Delhi. How can we secure these rights? If rights are life guarantees, they are of no use if there is no one to honor them. The fundamental rights in the Constitution are important because they are enforceable. We have a right to seek the enforcement of the above mentioned rights. This is called right to constitutional remedies. This itself is a fundamental right. This right makes other rights effective. It is possible that sometimes our rights may be violated by fellow citizens, private bodies, or by the government. When any of the rights are violated, we can seek remedy through courts. If it is a fundamental right, we can directly approach the Supreme Court or the High Court of a state. That is why Dr. Ambedkar called the right to constitutional remedies the heart and soul of a constitution. Fundamental rights are guaranteed against the actions of legislatures, executive, and any other authorities instituted by the government. There can be no law or function, action that violates the fundamental rights. If any act of the legislature or executive takes away or limits any one of the fundamental rights, it will be invalid. We can challenge such laws of the central and the state government, the policies and action of the government, or the governmental organization like the nationalized bank or electricity board. Courts also enforce the fundamental right against private individuals and bodies. The Supreme Court and the High Court have the power to issue directions, orders, or writs for the enforcement of the fundamental rights. They can also award a compensation to the victims and punishment. So here is given the National Human Rights Commission. You have to read this. And punishment of the violators. We have already seen in chapter 4. The judiciary in our country is independent of the government and the parliament. We also noted that our judiciary is very powerful and can do whatever is needed to protect the rights of the citizen. In case of any violation of the fundamental right, and the aggrieved person can go to a court for remedy. But now, any person can go to a court against a violation of the fundamental right if it is a social or public interest. It is called public interest litigation. Under the PIL, any citizen or group of citizens can approach the Supreme Court or a High Court for the protection of the public interest against a particular law or actions of the government. One can write to the judges or even to the postcard. The court will take up the matter. The judges find it in the public interest. Expanding scope of rights. We begin this chapter by discussing the significance of rights. Much of this chapter we have focused only the fundamental rights in this constitution. You might think that fundamental rights granted by the constitution are the only rights citizens have. That is not true. While fundamental rights are the source of all rights, our constitution and law officers offers a wider range of rights. Over the years, the scope of rights have expanded. Sometimes it leads to expansion of the legal right that the citizen can enjoy. From time to time, the courts gave judgment to expand the scope of right. Certain rights have right to freedom of press, right to freedom, and right to education, and derived from the fundamental right. Now, school education has become a right for Indian citizens. The government is responsible for providing free and compulsory education to all children up to the age of 14 years. Parliament has enacted a law giving the right to information of the citizens. This act was made under the fundamental right to freedom of thought and expression. We have right to seek information from government officers. Recently, the Supreme Court expanded the meaning of the right of life to include the right to food. Also, rights are not limited only to the fundamental right as enumerated by the Constitution. Constitution provides many more rights which may not be fundamental rights. For example, the right to property is not a fundamental right but is a constitutional right. Right to vote in election is an important constitutional right. Sometimes the expansion takes place in what is called the human right. There are universal moral claims that may or may not have been recognized by law. In that case, these claims are not right going by the definition that we presented earlier. With the expansion of democracy all over the world, there is greater pressure on government to accept these claims. Some international covenants have also contributed to the expansion of rights. Thus, the scope of rights have been expanding and new rights are evolving over time. They are a result of struggle of the people. New rights emerge as society to develop or as new constitutions are made. The constitutions of South Africa guarantees of citizens several kinds of new rights. Right to privacy so that citizens or their home cannot be searched, phones cannot be tapped, or their communication cannot be opened. Right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being. Right to have access to adequate housing. Right to have access to health care services, sufficient food and water. No one can be refused emergency medical treatment. Many people think that the right to work, right to health, right to minimum livelihood, right to privacy should be made fundamental right in India as well. What do you think? Amnesty International, an international organization of volunteers who campaign for human rights. This organization brings out independent report on the violation of human rights all over the world. Claim, demand for legal or moral entitlements a person makes on fellow citizens, society of the government. Covenant, promise made by individuals, groups of countries to uphold a rule or principle. It is legally binding on the signatories of the agreement or statement. That is, a person who belonged to the caste that were considered low, not touchable by of others. That is also known by other names such as the scheduled caste, depressed classes, etc. Ethnic group. An ethnic group is a human population whose members also usually identify with each other on the basis of the common ancestry. People of an ethnic group are united by cultural practices, religious beliefs, and historic memories. Traffic, selling and buying of men, women, or children for moral immoral purposes. Summon, an order issued by a court asking a person to appear before it. Writ, a formal document containing an order of the court to the government issued by the High Court of the Supreme Court. So that's all about this chapter. If you are interested, please do like, share, and subscribe my channel. Okay, thank you.